ISA 500 audit evidence, we're only looking at an expert. We've done sufficient appropriate evidence. We've done selecting items and inconsistencies. We left with portion of information to be used that links to an expert. So let's go there. So information to be used, we are only looking at paragraph 8, which states, if information is to be used that has been provided using the work of management experts, the auditor will have to do the necessary work. A, evaluate the competence, capabilities, and objectivity. So that was our first point and our second point. Then, obtain an understanding of the work, which was our third point, and then evaluate the appropriateness of the expert's work. So let's go to those A paragraphs from 34 to 48, which details what we need to do. So we're looking at the competence, capabilities, and objectivity of a management expert. And guys, I'm going to start at paragraph A38. Information regarding the competence, capabilities, and objectivity. Personal experience with the expert will give us some information. Discussions with that expert. Discussions with others who are familiar with the expert's work. I specifically excluded these two discussions in my points because they are oral, but guys, they are valid. You will get your marks. Then, knowledge of their expert's qualification and whether they're members of a professional body, looking at any published papers or books. All of these are going to give us some evidence about their competence. A43 deals with the objectivity of the expert and you need to discuss with management and the experts about any interests and relationships. And they give us some examples, financial interests or business and personal relationships. Then we move on to obtaining an understanding of the work of the management expert. So whether there are any professional or other standards that regulate this profession, what assumptions and methods have been used, and the nature of the data that was used by the expert. And these points can be put down as they are to get you theory marks. And lastly, we need to evaluate the appropriateness of the management expert's work, which we can do by looking at the assumptions and the methods and the completeness and accuracy of their source data. So we can actually go and test that, but you can also put these points down as they are. Next, let's look at ISA 620. Slightly different here because it actually splits each requirement into paragraphs. So we've got the competence and capabilities and objectivity paragraph, understanding the field of expertise. We've then got the agreement and evaluating the adequacy of the auditor's expert's work. So this entire standard is relevant to the expert, hence there's specific paragraphs for each requirement. So let's start with paragraph 9, which says the auditor must evaluate the expert's competence, capabilities, and objectivity. And in the objectivity evaluation, inquire about interests and relationships. Okay, so that we've already added, and A14 to A20 will give us the rest. A15 says to evaluate the competence and capabilities, we need to look at personal experience, discussions with the expert, discussions with other auditors who have dealt with the expert, knowledge of the qualifications, memberships of professional bodies, published papers. Okay, let's go to A20 for objectivity. So when evaluating objectivity, we've got to look at known interests or relationships. So we can discuss with the experts and with management about whether there are any financial interests or business and personal relationships. Obtaining an understanding of the field of expertise of the auditor. I've got A22 highlighted, and we have to determine the nature, scope, and objectives of the expert's work, as well as evaluating the adequacy. A22, I specifically want you to see, we've got to look at whether there are any professional or other standards that the expert has to apply, what assumptions and methods, and then the nature of the data. Next, we've got the agreement with the expert, and I've only highlighted there that there must be confidentiality requirements. And finally, evaluating the adequacy of the auditor's expert work. Here we are required to look at the relevance and the reasonableness of the conclusions, the assumptions, and the source data. I'm going to take you to A33. And here is a nice list of procedures to do. Guys, these are all relevant steps to perform when you are assessing a management expert. 2. They were not included in detail in ISA 500, but they are here and they are relevant. Okay, so when assessing an expert, turn to A33 of ISA 620 for all the work. And there you can see inquiries with the expert, reviewing the expert's working papers, corroborating procedures, so observing the work, examining published data, performing analytical procedures, reperforming calculations. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that, and let's go to ISA 610, internal auditors. ISA 610, using the work of internal audit. Under the requirements, we've got determining in which area, then we've got using the work of internal audits, and that's where I want to focus. So let's go to the requirements. Before we can get to their work, however, we have to evaluate internal audit. So our first one, to look at their objectivity, and then once we're comfortable with objectivity, we have to look at their competence. And then finally, whether they've got a systematic and disciplined approach for quality control. So let's go to those A paragraphs. So in evaluating the objectivity, we are now doing something different. We've got to look at their organizational status to see if they are free from bias. Okay, and they can be free from bias if they report to those charged with governance. We then look at whether they are free from conflicting responsibilities. So, do they have any managerial or operational duties or responsibilities? Whether those charged with governance oversee the employment, so we can make sure that they are independent, objective employees. And who do those charged with governance need to be? The audit committee, who comprise of independent, non-executive directors. Other considerations, whether there are any constraints or restrictions placed on them, or whether they are members of a professional body. We then go to the competence of internal audit. How can we look at that? If they are appropriately resourced, if they have policies for hiring and training, and whether they are adequately trained themselves. And whether they are members of a professional body or have professional designation. The new element specifically for internal audit is whether they've got that systematic and disciplined approach for quality control. So do they have supervision and review? That is what we need to consider before we look at their work. Okay, now we've assessed them, let's move on to evaluating their work. So we've got to obviously make sure that they've properly planned their procedures, they've been supervised, and then finally that their conclusions are appropriate. And A27 onwards is going to give us the work we need to do to assess that. So we need to make inquiries with them, observe their procedures, review their working papers, reperform any function that we can that they've done. Okay, and that's ISA 610 out the way. Moving on.